talk about opportunity cost and price. And the one thing that I want you to take away from this lecture is to remember that in a properly functioning market system, the price is a good representative of opportunity cost. The price is an accurate representation of opportunity cost. And what I just said is going to make more sense to you towards the end, but I want to make sure that you have the punchline of what we're doing here today. Now, markets are institutions for reducing the transactions cost of impersonal exchange. States are institutions that have a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. Markets usually operate within a state context, although sometimes we see markets operating across states, as in the case of international trade. And sometimes you see markets operating without states at all in chaotic situations like Somalia, or maybe exchanges among pirates or prison gangs. Still, for the most part, we think of states as being prior to markets. That is, states set up property rights, institutions like the law, judges, police, and a currency or some medium of exchange. Now, division of labor is something that in both markets and states, people are organized to specialize and produce things for each other. But states and markets handle division of labor quite differently. States organize protected territories with laws. Markets organize exchange among or within states. Now, both state organizations and markets can encourage both profits and rent seeking. So if I earn accounting profits, that is, I'm getting paid for some activity, we can't be sure that it's socially productive. In the last couple of lectures, we've worked on that distinction between profit seeking and rent seeking. And so you remember that profits are really the argument for using capitalism because it's a reward for creating value. Rent seeking, which is a lot of what we see passing for profits in modern crony capitalist societies, is a pretty good objection to capitalism because it's a way that the rich get richer not by creating value, but by protecting themselves from competition, which really harms consumers rather than helping them. And we talked about rent extraction, which is the corrupt practice of changing the rules or threatening harm to others who have value or who have wealth. So you remember that in any kind of state, the median is what's best. And so the way that politics actually works may look closer to this. Got a lobbyist, pay no attention to the man outside senator. And the senator is sort of torn, but here's the voter. So we've got the senator and the lobbyist making the decision, and the voter is on the outside. And it might be that the consumer is out there too. So this collaboration between lobbyists and our elected representatives is a problem. It's a problem for markets and it's a problem for the state. I want to illustrate a concept that I think is the single most important concept in all of economics, and that's opportunity cost. Now, most people can define opportunity cost. It's just the value of anything, the cost of some action. It's what you give up by doing this. Now, I gave a version of the little story that I'm about to tell you when I was teaching intermediate microeconomics at Dartmouth College in the mid-'80s. I was an economics professor at Dartmouth. I gave this question on the midterm in my microeconomics class, and I expected, because I'm a really good teacher and the students are smart, that they would all get it right. Most of them got it wrong. And I think the interesting thing about that is that we're not very good at thinking about opportunity cost. So that's what I'm going to work on here today. Now, in my story in the mid-'80s, I used Bruce Springsteen as my example, as someone who was going around the country giving large concerts at the time, selling out big stadiums. Now we might have to use Taylor Swift as being someone who's very popular, or maybe Wu Bai in China, who sells out large concert venues. The music world now is so much more varied that you don't see the same sort of large concerts. But let's just imagine. And we'll do this. Sitting in front of my computer, and I know that my significant other is a really big Taylor Swift fan. And I have agreed that I will go down and get the tickets to the Taylor Swift concert that'll be here soon. Now, let's suppose that I can't buy them online, and let's suppose also that the tickets are festival style, which means that there's no assigned seating. So all seats are the same as any others. Well, the problem that we have is I'm sitting there at my computer. I've promised my significant other I'm going to go buy these tickets, but there's some punks that jump up to get beat down on Facebook. I have to correct them. Someone said something wrong on the internet, and so I get involved. See, it's happened to you, hasn't it? You've been up all night. Someone says something wrong on the internet. Next thing I know, it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I did not go down to get in line, and so I run down. And I notice there's a long line ahead of me, and the ticket window opens at 9 o'clock. And as the sun comes up, I see that there's thousands and thousands of people ahead of me in line. So I hopefully shuffle along in the line. I get pretty close, another couple hundred yards, and kabang, the window comes down. Sold out. All the tickets are gone. Well, I'm pretty upset, because I made a promise and I did not carry it out, and my significant other expected me to do this. Well, I'm walking along. I'm sad. I have let my significant other down because I promised that I would get these tickets. But then I hear a commotion, and I hear someone saying, "Taylor Swift tickets, I've got your Taylor Swift tickets right here." It's a scalper. I can go and buy those tickets. I can still save my skin from the wrath of my significant other. I run over there and I see that the scalper is asking, everybody know what a scalper is? A scalper is someone who resells tickets. So you've seen this like outside Duke games. Sometimes you'll see somebody reselling them. Well, I run over there and he wants $400 each for these tickets. And I think $400, that's a lot. I was willing to pay the $25 that the ticket actually cost, but $400, there's no way. Now I'm really sad. Being sad, I walk along with my head down. I kick a scuffed up envelope. I pick it up, and wonderful to tell, in the envelope are 2 tickets to the Taylor Swift concert. Now I look around. I want to satisfy myself morally that no one's lost these and is looking for them. I can't very well hold them up and say, "Did anybody lose tickets to the concert?" Because like 30 people are going to say, I did. So, all right, no. I satisfy myself that I'm not stealing these. These are my tickets. Now, I call my significant other and I say, what? And the choices were, "Honey, we're going to the concert because I got free tickets." Or something else. What would the something else be? How many of you would go to the concert? Most of you. Most of you would go to the concert. Why? Because you have tickets. Right. Think what we've established. Think what we've established. It was not worth $400 to you to go to the concert, right? You had a chance to buy them for $400 and you didn't go. Now you do have tickets. What does it cost you to go to the concert? No, not nothing. It cost you what you could sell those tickets for. It doesn't matter what you paid for them. The opportunity cost, the cost of going to the concert, is what you could sell the tickets for. We've already established it wasn't worth $800. So it cost you $800 to go to that concert, even though you found those tickets. The opportunity cost is what you give up, the next best alternative use. All right, I expected my students to understand that. They didn't. They all got it wrong. And what they said is, nobody thinks that way. What I said was, well, that's why you're in an economics class, pumpkin. Because this is, in fact, how you should think. Now, I'm not so sure. It really is true that most people don't think this way. But I also think it's important to recognize the costs of your action include being able to sell or let someone else use the ticket. That's the important thing. Suppose you know for sure that someone else wants those tickets more than you. Suppose they pay $1,000. Isn't it immoral for you to use something that someone else values more? Let me say that again. Isn't it immoral for you to use something that someone else values more? The advantage of a price system in a properly functioning market is that prices tell you how much other people value these resources. If you only value the ticket at $100, somebody else values it at $400, they can pay you $200 and you're both better off. You're both better off. It doesn't make sense for you to use that ticket if someone else values it more. Well, that's the problem of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is what other people value resources. Price is the market's attempt to measure that. Markets sometimes do that pretty well, and when they do, that's the best argument for using them. Now, there's all sorts of situations where the costs, including the loss of potential gains from choosing one alternative over another. Suppose I own a car or a house outright. How much does it cost me to own those things? Well, you might say nothing, but the answer is the interest that I could be earning on the money if I were to sell those things. If I have an expensive car and I never use it, it's costing me something. It's costing me the investment that I could have with that money by selling it. And think of the human part. Nobody's using that car. Somebody else would value that car. I'm selfishly keeping it. It does cost what somebody else values it. Suppose I have a house and I'm never there. What does it cost me to have that house? Well, you could say nothing because I'm not paying anything out. But somebody else would like to stay in that house. The amount of money they would spend to stay in that house is what it costs society. So what I'm giving up is the interest I could earn by selling that house and investing the money. That interest tells me how much other people value being able to use the house. So I realize this is a hard way to start thinking, but price tells you how much other people want this resource. That gives you a way of accounting for opportunity cost. If I invest in a bond that earns 3%, but not in a stock that earns 6%, and they have the same risk profile, it costs me 3%. Now, you can say, you're earning 3, but I'm not earning the 6 that I could be. And so that decision costs me 3%. So I was just up in New York City and saw this, so I took a picture. And this is a park. It's a whole block in the East Village. And it's on 245 Greenwich Street, the corner of Greenwich Street and Elizabeth Street. And what this sign says is, New York wants to destroy our garden. Well, is that what they want? What they want to do is use it for something else. Does it make sense to have an entire block devoted to a garden? It might, but the cost of doing that is the businesses that could be there, the people who could live there. It costs something to use that as a garden. That's the opportunity cost. Now, it's a pretty garden. It's got all sorts of fountains and statues. I didn't see any people there. There's other parts of New York where there's a lot more people. It's pretty expensive to use this for just a few people. Let's watch a video about price and what it can tell us. What's better, knowing the price of something or knowing with perfect information how much something should cost? It's a trick question. Suppose there are two farmers, Al Truis and Mo Cash for Me. Each of them has 500 acres of land that could grow either corn or soybeans. Suppose I ask what their plans are. Both of them text back, I don't know. Now suppose we've borrowed a crystal ball from some genie and we know everything. Among the things the crystal ball can tell us are that Brazil has had a terrible summer with drought and then late floods that wiped out 40% of their soybean crop. It also tells us that new uses for soybean curd have pushed up consumer demand for soy paste all over Asia. Meanwhile, corn crop yields have hit record highs all over the world, and at the same time, several countries ended their corn-based ethanol programs, leading to an extraordinary corn surplus. Our first farmer, Al, has to decide what to plant. Al never wanted anything for himself. All he cares about was doing what was best for all of humanity. He does research, trying to decide which crop will be better for humanity as a whole. But it's hard for Al to determine what information is most relevant, because he doesn't trust price information, and the knowledge that he needs is too dispersed, too specific, and too hard to learn. Now, Al knows a lot, but still not enough. He's stuck at I don't know. So he makes a guess, plants corn. Al's put a tremendous amount of time and resources into his research instead of focusing on what he's good at, running a farm. As a result, he doesn't get much corn planted, has a hard time selling the corn he does produce. He has to sell for very little, and he ends up bankrupt. Let's look at Mo's experience. Since he cares only about profits, he focuses on prices. In early February, the price of corn futures falls sharply. But soy futures indicate that prices for soy delivered in August should be excellent. Why did this happen? Mo has no idea, and he couldn't possibly care less. Mo sells a large soy futures contract to lock in the high price and plant soy on every square inch of land that he owns. It's a selfish bet, one that'll make Mo a lot of money. Instead of trying to be an expert in all the disparate subjects he'd need to master, to have perfect information about the marketplace, he just focused time and resources on running his farm. And the only other information he used was prices. So he produced a lot of soybeans and did well for himself. Which of the two did the right thing, the better thing for society? What would the genie with the crystal ball have told us? The genie would have looked at the glut of corn and the shortage of soy that made it so valuable and told us what people need is more soy. But of course, there's no such thing as genies in the real world. Information is too dispersed, too complicated to solve the IDK problem through research. There's just too much to know. Fortunately, farmers don't need a crystal ball because prices do exactly what we were hoping that the genie would do. Farmers don't need to know why a price is high or low. And in fact, no single person could possibly explain it fully. But by growing the crop that produces the greater profit, farmers can produce the crop that solves the shortage, meets the demand, and satisfies the requirements of innovation. It's impossible to attain perfect information about the entire marketplace, which is changing all the time. Prices are a way of condensing all that information into one easily understood signal, almost like magic. Let me ask a question that relates to opportunity cost. All businesses face a decision called the make or buy decision, and so do you as consumers. How many of you made your own shoes? you made your own, nice. You did not make your own shoe. He's kidding. Didn't happen. None of you made your own shoes. Why? You had to pay somebody else. Well, the answer is that by paying someone else, you freed yourself up to do other things, and the shoes that you could buy were better and cheaper than what you could have made. All of us face make or buy decisions. None of us make all our own stuff. Well, who should make the stuff that we buy? And I've given you a hint. It's the one who has the lowest opportunity cost. The people who have the lowest opportunity cost of manufacturing things we need are the ones who should make it. So, I know none of y'all go into bars, but suppose you did. You go into a bar, and you don't have much money, so you want to win a bet. What country in the world lost the most manufacturing jobs between 1995 and 2005? And what country in the world has the largest total manufacturing output measured in any currency that you want to pick? Answer to the first question, And the answer to the second question are US and China, but not in that order. China lost the most manufacturing jobs. China lost the most manufacturing jobs. You hear our politicians say we're shipping all our jobs to China. That's actually not true. And the United States still has the largest manufacturing by value. It's getting close, but the US still has the largest manufacturing by value. So if you look at real manufacturing output per US worker, it's been steadily going up. The key is per US worker. That's how we measure productivity, and that's the thing to underline. You realize you're kind of tired, you've been talking about this for a while, wake up. Productivity. The whole world has lost jobs to productivity. The United States has lost jobs to productivity. China has lost jobs to productivity. The reason we have trouble with manufacturing employment is that our workers are so productive. We can make so much stuff. Each farmer, each shoemaker, each person who works making iPhones can make so much stuff. That's a win. How did China lose jobs? Well, they also lost it to productivity. Here is a Chinese factory in 1995. Thousands of women with sewing machines. Here is a Chinese factory in 2005, after mechanization. There's not many people. They're making far more textiles. But you compare this and this, there's thousands of jobs that were lost to produce this. The reason this happened was that they could produce more stuff at a lower price. The reason we buy so much stuff from China is that Chinese workers are so productive. American workers are productive too, but they have high wages. Chinese workers are having higher and higher wages as their productivity goes up. The thing to remember is the whole world is losing jobs to productivity. And the reason that's a good thing is we would like for price to reflect opportunity cost. China can make clothing, textiles, shoes far more cheaply than workers in the United States, which means that US consumers can buy those things far more cheaply than if they were made in the United States. Now, there is a problem. So you see forgive me. You see this old factory and it's closed. And first it happened in England. All of the manufacturing companies in England closed. They stopped making textiles. They all moved to Massachusetts, New Jersey, Connecticut. And then they moved from there to North Carolina, Alabama, South Carolina, many textile and hosiery mills. And then they moved to China. Right now, wages in China are increasing as productivity goes up. They're going to move again. So the fact that all these factories are closed really is a problem. But it's not a problem for consumers. And here's something you might not have thought of. Market economies serve consumers. Market economies serve consumers, not workers. Economies do not produce jobs. Economies always destroy jobs. Economies always destroy jobs. That's what economies are supposed to do. Increased productivity means that we get more and more stuff from fewer workers. That's good for consumers. It's really bad for workers. How can we solve that problem? Don't we have an obligation, since we get so many benefits from markets, to insulate workers from the pain, the damages that are no fault of their own? So this is a political problem, though. It's not an economic problem. Economically, the system's working the way it's supposed to. How do we secure the gains of trade without punishing the workers who lose their jobs through no fault of their own? So 1985 in Fort Payne, Alabama, 20% of the world's sock output was produced in a few counties just in northern Alabama. So most of the places you went to buy socks, you would find were made in Alabama. 2005, just 20 years later, 35% of the world's sock output is produced in Datang, China. One of every 3 socks that you have are made in the district of Datang in China. It's also known as Sock City. What happened to Alabama? Well, unemployment's 30%. all of the people who used to make socks now are unemployed. All of those factories are empty. Are we better off? Well, the workers in Alabama aren't better off. I'm better off. You're better off. We can buy socks and many other products much more cheaply. So the benefits go to all consumers. The costs are concentrated on a relatively small number of people. Question is, how do we thread that needle? Economists often say, well, the advantage of free trade is it makes everybody better off. Bull pucky, it does not. Free trade harms workers in many industries. In a dynamic economy, we're constantly building and destroying jobs. That's good for consumers. How do we solve the political problem? So, the town of Datang, the region of Datang, now produces 8 billion pairs of socks each year. So, that's 2 pairs of socks for every person on Earth. And a lot of people go barefoot. So y'all are buying some socks out there. I don't know what you're doing with all those socks. I understand they get separated. You know, you can't find the mate because the sock fairy is taking one. But still, we're going through a whole lot of socks because they're very cheap. The price is very low. There's 100,000 people employed there making socks. Now that seems like a lot, but they're producing socks for the whole world. If you go to Walmart, you're going to have a hard time finding socks that were not produced within 50 miles of Datang, China. So, let's change gears for a second. We often say that the motivating factor in markets is greed. And I've tried to give you an example of that's actually not true. The motivating factor in markets is consumers. What consumers want, entrepreneurs try to provide. Now, a lot of them fail, and that's why we sometimes lose jobs. But consumers, using the profit test that we talked about last week, are the ones who are motivating this system. So, what's useful? What's the organizing principle in markets? And the answer is price. Price is far from perfect as an organizing principle, but it has a number of advantages that we don't always understand. And the chief one, I'm going to keep hammering on this, the chief one is that in a properly functioning market, and a lot of markets don't function well, there's all sorts of political restrictions on competition, there's ways that crony capitalists get to protect themselves from outsiders, and in that case the price is not a good reflection. But if the market's functioning well, price is an excellent representation of the opportunity cost of the resource. It tells you how much other people value it. And you won't value it unless you won't use it unless you value it more than other people. So we'll talk later in the semester about price gouging laws, but often here in North Carolina, and you'll see this as winter comes on, if there's even the threat of a little bit of snow, everybody goes to the grocery store and buys all the bread and milk. Now, why doesn't the grocery store raise the price to ensure that there's enough for everybody to get some? The answer is we have an anti-gouging law, so all the shelves are empty. Let me ask you, if the shelves are empty, what's the price of bread? If there is no bread, the price is infinity. I can't get any. So, as I said, we'll talk about this, but the problem is all the bread that was on this shelf was $3 a loaf. And I think, well, at $3 a loaf, it may snow, I may not be back for a week, I'm going to buy 3 loaves. But if the price were raised to $10, that would reflect the fact that the person behind me and behind them and behind her also wants some bread. I think I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave some bread for them. The price tells me that I should not, as a consumer, be so greedy that I take it all for myself. I need to leave some for someone else. So the reason that the price cannot serve this function is price gouging laws prevent the price from going up in a state of emergency. So let's review. A market is a collection of institutions for reducing the transactions cost of impersonal exchange. The chief advantage of markets is that they generate scarcity signals called price. And it is immoral for you to use something that someone else values more. The advantage of the price system is that it tells you that. Otherwise, I have no way of knowing. The advantage of the price system tells me how much other people value it because it reflects opportunity cost. Now, let's think a little bit about a situation where you may not have thought much about price. Suppose you care a lot about the environment. A lot of you do. I certainly care about the environment. I would like to be a steward of the environment and leave it to my children. What should you think about market systems and free trade? If you really, really care about the environment, what do prices tell you? Well, remember I've said in a properly functioning market system, prices reflect the opportunity cost of the resource. Problem is, what does it cost to use the atmosphere for a dumping ground? Well, nothing, unless there's regulation. What does it cost for me to use the rivers and oceans as a place to put poison, pollutants? Nothing, unless there's regulation. So the problem is that prices without government action often do not reflect the opportunity cost of the resource. So that may require some other solution. Markets are not very good in situations that later in the semester we'll talk about, in situations that are called externalities. Externalities are when an action by me, the buyer, and you, the seller, affects her, someone else who's not involved in the transaction. Markets aren't very good at solving that problem. And the problem that I see, though, is that some of the solutions that we have may make things worse because instead of markets, we use morality. And morality is a pretty blunt instrument. The nice thing about prices is things can change. Morality is just an imperative. Which, would you guess, what kind of column holds the record for the most hate mail ever received by the New York Times in response to an article? And think of the things that the Times covers: abortion, terrorism, racism, journalistic bias, fraud, none of those. It was a piece by John Tierney called "Recycling is Garbage." You do not get to say recycling is garbage, because we all know recycling is good. Why? Why is recycling good? Right? Yes, it keeps things out of landfills. Is that good? It might be. We could recycle everything if we wanted. What are we saving when we recycle? Well, let's think about it. John Tierney thought recycling was a pretty bad idea. Here's an excerpt. If Americans keep generating garbage at current rates for 1,000 years, and if all their garbage is put in a landfill 100 yards deep, by the year 3000, this national garbage heap will fill a square piece of land 35 miles on each side. The millennial landfill would fit on 0.1% of the range land now available for grazing in the continental United States. Eventually, like previous landfills, the mounds of trash will be covered with grass and become a minuscule addition to the nation's 150,000 square miles of parkland. So, the cost of failing to recycle, if we recycle nothing, will convert 0.1% of U.S. rangeland into a park. That doesn't seem so bad. Why are we worried about landfills? What's so important about landfills? We have plenty of space. Now, it may be that managing the landfill is difficult, but you can manage a landfill at a cost less than infinity. The idea that anything that goes to a landfill is wasted is wrong. It depends how much we waste keeping things out of landfills, and that's recycling. So, here's the question. I tell you something is recyclable, and you can always tell because it has this on it. That means it is possible to recycle it. Should we? Well, the theme of this lecture is there's this magic thing that tells us the answer, and it's called price. Price tells you what we should recycle and what we shouldn't. Now, I've also said that price sometimes, in the presence of externalities, does a bad job of reflecting opportunity cost. What we really want to know is, what is the opportunity cost of recycling? And Does price tell us the answer? This is cullet. Cullet is what you get when you grind up glass. It's basically sand. Why is it a bad thing to put sand into a landfill? So let's narrow down now. Instead of talking about all recycling, let's talk about glass. Should we, as a society, put our resources into recycling glass, or should we put glass into landfills? Well, if we grind it up, it's sand, and a truckload of ground up glass has a lot of bottles in it. We actually can't use cullet for much because it's mixed. There's different colors, different kinds of glass. Unless you sort it very carefully, it's very difficult to use cullet. Now, you can sort the glass very carefully, but that uses up the one resource we can never make more of. The ultimate non-renewable resource is time. Our time is extremely valuable. Is it worth spending time sorting glass to make sure that we can recycle it? So, more money, more time, and more resources are spent to move glass away from landfills than would be required just to put it in the landfill. So the little truck comes around, gets the recycling, takes it, we resort it, we use it for something else because we're very concerned about keeping it out of landfills. In 2008, I was the keynote speaker at a conference called Australia Recycles. And I didn't realize, but this was over 1,000 vendors, people who sell recycling equipment around the Pacific Rim. I was the tethered goat. So there I am giving my speech, and there's 1,000 people out there, all of whom make their living from recycling. They sell bins, they sell trucks, they sell grinders. And the thesis of my speech was that glass recycling is a large net waste of resources. That is, by recycling glass, we're wasting money and energy. We're using more energy. So if you want to make glass, what do you need? Sand. You're better off using virgin sand to make new glass and putting the old glass into the landfill than you are taking the ground up cullet and using it as the sand to make new glass, because it's full of chemicals and colors, whereas regular sand is not. We don't have a shortage of sand. We have plenty of sand. Well, I was a little scared of giving this talk. Remember what Han Solo said when Princess Leia, right before Han Solo was going to be frozen in carbonite? And Princess Leia said, "I love you." What did Han Solo say? Right, that's it. I know. That's what they said to me. We all know this. We all know that recycling glass is a net waste of resources. It's still the right thing to do. Wait, what? You know that it's a net waste of energy. You know that it's a net harm to the environment, and yet it's still the right thing to do? Yes, because people should recycle. And I was thunderstruck. It's a moral imperative. It doesn't matter that it's a net waste of resources. We just want to get people used to recycling. People yawned. They weren't angry at my talk. We all know this. Of course, it's a net waste of resources. If cities try to stop recycling glass, citizens force them to start again. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Charleston, West Virginia, Raleigh, North Carolina, New York City, Washington, D.C. have all tried to stop recycling glass. And voters forced them to continue to recycle. So now what happens here in Durham, North Carolina, if you put glass into a recycling container? They take it down to the main handling place, they put it in a bag, and then they carry it to the landfill, just to make you feel better about yourselves. Yes, they do. It goes to the landfill. It's too expensive. It's too expensive to recycle it. So you get to feel good about yourself by putting the glass into the recycle container, The recycle guy comes and picks it up and takes it to the center. They separate out the glass, and then they take it to the landfill. All over the United States, this is happening more and more. The reason is that that's the best they can accomplish. Glass should not be recycled. Glass morally should not be recycled. It's a large waste of energy. If you care about the environment, you shouldn't waste energy. It takes much less energy to make glass from sand than to make glass from cullet. And cullet is just sand. It does fine in a landfill. You can use it to fill in low places. It's excellent sand. So here's the thing. It is true that it's cheaper to dispose of recycling than it is in the landfill. So if all you do is look at this column, you're going to say, look at the net disposal costs, look at the net collection costs. Well, it costs $93 to put something in a landfill, and it only costs $38 to recycle because people will take paper, glass, aluminum. The problem is that the collection costs for recycling dwarf the collection cost for garbage. So overall, and this is not just glass, overall, the cost per ton for recycling is much larger. Now you can say, well, that's just money. It's not. Money is going to buy the resources that are used to do this recycling. It's paying people, it's buying trucks, it's paying for the gasoline that these internal combustion engines are burning as they drive around picking up stuff that shouldn't be recycled in the first place. It's a large net harm to the environment. It's more costly to recycle. And remember, when I said this, they said, we know. So in most cities, collecting a ton of recyclable items is at least 3 times more expensive than collecting tons of garbage because there's less of it. Most cities spend at least $200 more than they would to recycle than to bury the material in a landfill per ton. So the justification would have to be that we can recover the extra cost by selling, but we can't because it's not actually worth it. That's why it depends on price. Nobody will pay you for this stuff that you think is valuable. How do you tell if something's a resource? Somebody will pay you for it. If it's garbage, you have to pay them. So you think this stuff is valuable. If it were, somebody would come and pay you. Now, aluminum we should recycle. I have to admit, when I see somebody throw aluminum into the garbage can, I go get it and recycle it. We should recycle aluminum. The price tells us that it's worth it. Aluminum can easily be converted into new aluminum. Virgin aluminum that you make from bauxite takes a gigantic amount of energy. So aluminum and many kinds of paper we should totally recycle because the price tells us so. The price is telling us not to recycle glass, and we're doing it because we've made it a moral imperative. If recycling actually saved money, poor countries would do it, but only rich countries recycle. No poor countries recycle, because recycling is a large net waste of resources that we do to make ourselves feel better. So there was an interview at the Coors recycling plant in Colorado where several of the employees, when they were interviewed on condition of anonymity, a lot of what has been sorted for recycling ends up being landfilled, despite what you hear because of contamination or lack of market for the recycled material. Price! The price is too low. How much? Less than half. Maybe less than a quarter of what you recycle actually makes it to be recycled. So if 80,000 tons are picked up for recycling, 40,000 tons of it still end up in the landfill after having been handled and hauled around in a truck twice. We have a fetish about landfills because we recognize that we need to subsidize landfills. Why? Why do we need to subsidize landfills? People dump garbage illegally. People routinely dump garbage illegally. Well, if you charge too much at the landfill, they'll dump more by the side of the road. If you drive around out in the country, you may see old mattresses, refrigerators, just garbage strewn. You see a lot of this in developing nations because landfills there are too expensive. They have a hard time running the landfill with a subsidy. So we undercharge for landfills. If I take a truckload of garbage to the landfill in Wake County where I live, they don't charge me very much. And it's less than the actual cost. That means that we should recycle because I'm not paying the full cost of putting it in the landfill. Now I hope you're confused because this is confusing. We can't use price to judge whether to recycle or not, in spite of everything that I've said so far, because landfilling is too cheap. Somehow we have to figure out how much it would cost to put in the landfill. In the case of glass, not very much. In the case of some paper, food items, things that create leachates that are poisonous, it would be pretty high. It's difficult to use price to do this. The problem is that we've substituted morality. We know that landfills are too cheap. All right, let's say don't send it to the landfill unless you have to. Well, that means the less I send to the landfill, the better, and that's not true. You still need price to tell you the answer. So let me show an example. The problem that we've set ourselves is to choose the alternative that uses up the fewest resources. So we want to impose the smallest harm possible on other people. Opportunity cost is really a measure of harm. Choosing the resource with the lowest opportunity cost is the same thing as doing the least harm. Well, suppose you have to decide, you go to the grocery store, should you use paper or plastic bags? Well, the price of plastic is much less, but it's possible that plastic causes an externality where it damages the environment, it gets into the oceans. How do you value that? How do you decide whether the damage that plastic does to the environment is so important? Or you can say, I want to use plastic because I want to save the trees. Paper, after all, is made from trees. Well, there's two moral imperatives there. Which one do you count more? The only way you can solve that is to come up with opportunity cost. Problem is that price doesn't tell us much about that. I can tell you this. One paper bag costs about 7 cents. One plastic bag costs about 2 cents. Now, given the differences in how much they hold, they're not exactly comparable, but still, 2, maybe 2.5 plastic bags will hold us the same as a paper bag. So if I make an average grocery trip and use 10 plastic bags, that costs 20 cents. The same amount, 3.5 cubic feet, will cost about 35 cents if I use paper bags. Which one should I use? Well, it's tempting to say the one that's cheaper, and that's plastic. But we don't know about the other effects that plastic bags have on the environment. Paper, whatever else it does, decomposes, it composts. Plastic does not. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe future generations will strip mine landfills and say, look at all the buried plastic. This is a great energy source. Thank goodness that our ancestors had the foresight to put these things in mines, because this is our only source of fossil fuels. We can reconvert this. I'm only half kidding. If you think we have to keep things out of landfills at all cost, what do you do with plastic bags? In Europe, they burn them. They burn them. They get about a 10 or 12% return on the energy. You burn that, it means that nobody in the future has access to it. Why is it obvious that it's so important to keep this out of landfills that we should burn it and make sure that future generations don't have access to it? Plastic is an extremely good energy source. Why shouldn't we segregate it and bury it in landfills? Overall, the answer to which one uses fewer resources is the one that costs less. Whichever one costs less uses fewer resources if the price system is functioning properly. It may not be in this case. Then we face the problem of deciding how to value the resources. So if the price is not equal to the opportunity cost, if it's pollution, then the price is less than the opportunity cost. And we're going to take this up several times later in the semester. If it's pollution, if it's an economic bad instead of an economic good, the price is less than the opportunity cost. I'm paying less than it costs society for me to use this. That's the reason we're concerned about recycling. So the sort of solutions we might want is, first, get the price right. Let people who actually care about morality choose the low price outcome, but that requires that the opportunity cost is known and the state is sincerely not just subsidizing its cronies and buddies. Second, we can let the prices stay wrong but use moral suasion to encourage the correct outcome. But the problem is the answer may change. A few years ago we had a drought, and in order to save water, the Duke faculty restaurant started using paper plates and plastic forks. And the students protested, saying, well, we all know that this is bad, you're putting it in the landfill. Well, maybe it's bad, but water's scarce too. So it saved washing all of those plates and forks and cups. The price told us that water was more scarce than landfill. But because we have this moral sense, wait, putting stuff in landfills is evil, you can't trade off against that. So it was interesting to see the way that they were sort of conflicted. And then we might conclude that since price is not equal to opportunity cost, prices don't contain any information at all. The problem with that is that this then becomes religious. I actually found, when I was doing research on recycling, I talked to a very perky young woman who was the public relations officer for a small New England town. And I asked her why she was so concerned with, so interested in recycling. And she said, you have to understand, recycling is always cheaper no matter how much it costs. And this was such a gem, I asked her to repeat it. Oh yes, recycling is always cheaper no matter how much it costs. I don't even know what that means. Recycling's not cheaper if it costs more. And if it costs more, it's using more resources. For her, it was a religious imperative. That happens when we substitute approximate goal for being a moral imperative. And there's a great example. I also found this in a New England town. And usually when I say this, somebody has done it. They're not always willing to admit it. But a lot of places say that you should clean out jars and plastic containers before you put them in the recycle bin. How many of y'all have run garbage through your dishwasher? Nobody. One. Seriously? Yes, all right, one. 3 of the faculty in Duke's political science department, I know for a fact, run their garbage through the dishwasher to make sure it's clean. And the reason is, well, we know that it's important that it be clean so it can be recycled. You're using electricity and water combined with soap to clean garbage. It should be in the landfill. This is not gold. It doesn't have any value. It doesn't have any value. Nobody's going to pay you for it. You shouldn't be running garbage through your dishwasher. I have a friend who has a Prius. He's very concerned with his average miles per gallon. So much so that he will drive 10 miles out of his way to avoid a hill. He'll drive 10 miles, I'm not making this up, and he even admits it's crazy. He'll drive an additional 10 miles so that he doesn't pay the short increment, because his average miles per gallon, he doesn't care how much gas he uses. He's happy to waste another half gallon of gas. I guess in a Prius, another 1/10 of a gallon of gas. What he really, and he'll tell people, look, I'm concerned about the environment. My average miles per gallon is better than yours. But he drives out of his way to do that. He wastes resources in order to get this religious payoff of to him, it's, you should have the best average miles per gallon. Well, let me give one more example and then we'll knock off. I was visiting Santiago de Chile in a subdivision of Comuna, a metropolitan area called Vitacura. And Vitacura is a very wealthy part of Santiago, and they had opened not long before a recycling center. And in this recycling center, I mean, you can see, forgive me, you can see they have bags, here's containers of plastic. People are bringing the containers that they have full of paper. Some of them had aluminum cans. What's this? It's a line of cars. The line of cars was at least 20 minutes long. People were sitting in their cars idling for almost a mile. Their cars, the engines are running so that they can bring their recycling and put it into the recycling center. So I stayed there for a while. I tried to talk to people. My Spanish isn't really very good, and Chilenos don't really speak Spanish anyway. They speak way too fast. Here, they're taking one of the containers, which had gotten full. This place was really very busy. And then, I shouldn't have done this. I do regret this, but since I have it, I used the picture. I noticed this young woman who had been in line in her car for 20 minutes with her child. This is a Saturday morning. She's wasted 20 minutes with her child sitting in a car seat and her engine running, spewing pollutants into the atmosphere. She got out of her car. She had one cardboard box, a piece of paper, and two 2-liter Pepsi bottles. She spent all that time waiting to recycle. And so I took her picture. She became quite angry. I mean, fortunately, there's nothing creepy about some fat gringo taking pictures of attractive young women. So she did not call the police. I was lucky she did not call the police. I tried to talk to her. She really didn't want to say anything. In what alternative universe is it worth spending 20 minutes of time and gas to put a cardboard box and two 2-liter plastic bottles into a container? And I know the answer. Church. This was church. This was not to show, this was not I'm helping the environment. This is, here's how much I care about the environment. I care so much about the environment that I'll wait in line 20 minutes to take communion. Now, instead of communion the traditional way, I'm using garbage, but there's still this precious thing, the garbage that I'm not putting in the landfill. So the problem is we've lost sight of opportunity cost. We've lost sight of the fact that the price of this stuff is almost zero. And we've substituted a moral imperative. And a lot of things we should recycle. The price tells us that we should. My concern is that by substituting morality for the price system, we're actually doing more harm to the environment than we have to. Well, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.